And if we could maybe stop sharing the slide now. Yeah. Great. Thank you. And now my favorite part, I get to welcome all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Chiara Morfeo. I'm part of Sustainable UCL, which is like a hub for all things sustainability at UCL, really. And our team organized the panel discussion today as part of our 28 Days of Sustainability event program. We all know that climate change is a global problem that affects BIPOC communities and women disproportionately. And so today's panel discussion, as you probably all read, is on climate justice and injustice, and also the role of women in that space, not only as they're impacted by climate change, but also as they're taking action to tackle the problem. But our panelists and our chair will be able to speak about this much more eloquently. So it's my great honor to introduce our chair for today, Aarushi Menon. Maybe put your hands together behind your screens. Aarushi is UCL's a women's officer. And that means that last year, lots of students voted for Aarushi to represent women students at UCL. And she does lots of campaigns and projects, some of which also touch on the environment. For example, Aarushi leads on a project that's called Project Period at UCL that focuses on getting free and sustainable period products in UCL bathrooms. But you'll now all have the chance to get to know Aarushi a lot better yourselves, because I'm handing over to Aarushi to introduce the panelists and start the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara. It's very weird hearing yourself be introduced. Thank you. I am so excited about this. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. Let's get straight into it. I'm so excited to have this conversation. So let's introduce our incredible panelists. First of all, we have Simone Ahyaku, who is an incredible award-winning changemaker, campaigner, activist. She has done incredible work about climate justice and liberating all unequal systems of power and oppression. She's been campaigning around collective liberation and solidarity, and she uses facilitated workshops to explore climate colonialism and the history of climate resistance. Hello, Simone. Give us a little wave. Yeah. Then we have our amazing Chantelle Richardson, who is a librarian at the National Library of Jamaica. She was the sustainability ambassador when she was at the Good Enough College during her British Library Research Fellowship. And she's an aspiring social entrepreneur and sustainable living advocate. Hi. And I know, it's really weird, right? And last but definitely not least, we have Dainalyn Swaby, who is who you guys might know from her climate awareness projects, like her podcast Global Yardie. She's also represented Jamaica and the Caribbean at the UN Youth Climate Summit and the COP25 Climate Change Conference. Hi, everyone. Okay, I know I said a couple things here and there. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about your background, what you're working on at the moment? Do you want to pick someone to go first? Because are we at that weird? Simone.
Cool. Hey everyone, I'm Simone. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a climate campaigner. It's also so strange to hear yourself introduced every time. I used to work on divestment campaigns at university. And that divestment is where you take your investments outside of something. So we were campaigning for universities to take their direct investments out of the fossil fuel industry. So companies like Shell and BP. Now I'm working still in the student movement. I work on liberation campaigns at the National Union of Students, and I'm working on their decolonized education campaign. And yeah, outside of work, I am just learning about climate resistance histories by Black Indigenous people of color in the global South and across the world. Also, like Black feminism is really, really near and dear to my heart, and it's something that shapes how I organize, how I live, and how I interact with people in society. So I'm really, really excited to be here today and be chatting about both climate justice and feminism and all the good things.
Awesome, thank you. What about Chantelle?
Thank you so much for those kind words of introduction. As you rightly said, it's really weird to hear yourself being introduced. It's a great privilege to be here with my, what I say, climate sisters, Simone and Dainalyn, to share and just to learn as usual. In terms of what I'm working on, I am tapping into my networks to see how I can further, add my voice to different climate actions. I follow a group called Earth Today, which sends a lot of updates. We sign a lot of petitions. We share a lot of petitions in terms of how we can, add our voices to, the climate conversations. And just as Simone said, I'm always open. As a librarian, we promote lifelong learning. I'm always looking for ways to learn and to share about how I can make a change or how I can add my voice to the climate conversation and make a difference. For especially, persons from my own community and country and region on, climate issues and how it is affecting us and how we can be a part of the solution.
That's incredible. I can't wait to talk more about that. And Dainalyn.
Hi, everyone. Let me just say happy International Women's Day to everyone in this room, cisgender, transgender, whatever you identify. If you identify as female today, then today is our day. Well, what have I been working on? A lot of things, too many things, but mainly, as you mentioned, my podcast, Global Yadi, I've been really throwing myself into that. It's a space that explores climate change issues, culture, and sustainable living with a lot of people from across the world. Most recent episode featured Simone, and we were talking about climate justice, the verdict on climate justice. So it's an extension of this conversation, perhaps. And I want to encourage everyone to follow Global Yadi spelled YAADIE, and you can follow that conversation on major podcast listening platforms. And outside of that, I've been working with a lot of volunteer and professional groups regarding climate engagement and youth engagement to climate change, especially focused on Jamaica as well, and representing small island developing countries. Yeah, that's it in a nutshell, and maybe also exploring culturally relevant ways of engaging. Just also participated in a spoken word event where I shared a climate poem and all of those things. So pretty much zooming in on climate culture and communication. That's all I'm about right now.
That's incredible. Thank you so much to all three of you for saying all of that. So let's jump right in. So we're starting with the hard-hitting questions. What does climate justice mean to you, and why is it important to talk about climate change in terms of its human impacts, especially its impacts on like Black and Indigenous people of color around the world, and particularly in the global South?
All right, because you ended with the global South, I'm just gonna jump out on that. So climate justice, it's a very layered conversation. We can't stop talking about it, and we need to be speaking about it. I think in a sense it's really about care and I'm going to say care and consideration for people who don't have that immediate capacity to respond to climate challenges. So even for me, my background being exposed to climate conversation, I was an intern working with a climate project and I transitioned full time. And the mandate of that organization, I thought it was just okay what that organization did. But when I looked at the broader scope of addressing climate problems, you always start with vulnerabilities. You target vulnerable communities, you target vulnerable people or areas that are degraded and all of that. And I think even in the context of climate justice, you always look at who is being affected the most. And when you look at the people who are affected the most, usually in almost all parts of the world, people from low income communities, Black, Indigenous, people of color, marginalized communities, and even within the context of that, through my research, something that we tend to overlook, special needs communities. So it's a compounded issue, and it's about trying to balance and level the playing field to make sure that these people have access to the resources and build capacity to respond to climate challenges and lessen how the situation affects them. So that's my long and winded uh, interpretation of what climate justice is.
I mean, it wasn't long-winded. I feel like every word in that
And
had
I wanted to,
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
Go ahead, Chantelle. Sorry.
I want to jump in on Dainalyn's point. In terms of what climate change means to me, I would say inclusivity. That's the first word that comes to my mind. I think it is very, very important to add the voice of different people in the climate conversation. That's one of the reasons what that has really propelled my activity in terms of sustainable living, because I believe that many times the conversations about climate change and climate justice, it's coming from different spheres, but I don't see persons from TikTok or persons from a person who look like me, for example. Really, the story is always, to share their stories and to share their the things that are affecting them within their communities in terms of how climate change is impacting them.
So we lost you in the middle a little. I feel like we got you back towards the end. Is there any part of that you want to say again, or are you happy with the point you ended on? Okay.
I don't know if you got all of that because my internet
Yeah, we got the first half, and that was it.
Yeah, I was just sharing that climate justice means inclusivity. When I hear the word climate justice or the term climate justice, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And that is what really fuels my advocacy. I believe that it is important, as Dainalyn said, to get the perspective from all groups of people, not just, it's one thing to be, living in another place and speaking about climate change in a very broad sense. But it's also, it's more important for persons who are actually, it's affecting us now to add our voice to that conversation and to add our perspectives and tell our stories. And it's important for persons like us to see persons looking like them, speaking on these issues and giving the solutions or being a part of the solution. And so that, being a part of, the BIPOC and Global South, we need to be sharing our perspective. A lot of the times the information or a lot of the perspectives on climate change, it's coming from the North and persons saying in a very broad sense, and it is a broad issue, but also it is important for those of us who are affected by or living, the effects of climate change to speak up and be inclusive and be given an opportunity to have a seat at the table and share our perspectives and our solutions as well.
Absolutely, 100%. I really love the way that you put that, like the importance of, and the value of those voices in these conversations. Simone, did you want to comment on this, or?
Yeah, quite similar to the other panelists. Like, to me, like, climate justice is about a recognition of like our interconnectedness and like interdependence on the world. So like the human, non-human, the land, like our ancestral knowledge, like practices, the weather, climate, like everything's connected. And like climate justice to me is about the liberation of all oppressive systems which exploit, control, and categorize people, the land, and its resources, particularly Black, Indigenous, people of color, as like something beneath like white Western, like European ways of being and like European ways of like extracting and profit. And I think like climate justice speaks to the root of these systems, which is like colonialism, like capitalism, the patriarchy. And I think like climate justice can't be separated from social justice, like connecting the links between our struggles and like uniting our demands against these systems that create and perpetuate like exploitation and inequality and extraction, I think will ultimately lead to climate justice and like our collective liberation. I think why it's important to like consider the human impact is like we're currently seeing like really, really high rising sea levels, like frequent and disastrous like hurricanes, prolonged drought, like water and food scarcity. And they're all really, really current and frontline issues for like people in the global south, especially. And we have to think about how like the country's ability to like sort of rebuild and like rebuild itself after these frequent and prolonged impacts. And I think it's important around like climate justice to think about which countries and companies and corporations are profiting like off climate breakdown and putting Black, Indigenous people of color, particularly in the global south, in like closer proximity to like pollution and harm and death just for the sake of profit.
Yeah, 100%. I like like the climate. I said 5 words and none of them formed a sentence. I'm sorry. Yeah, I love that. I love that point you just made of like this of it being a symptom of a much more insidious, like larger thing. Do we still have Dainalyn and Chantelle? Have you? Is everyone okay? Yeah, cool. It's cool if you're still here. That's no worries. Just wanted to make sure. So. Then why is it important to give attention to gender representation in climate action? What's the importance of female leadership in this space?
If I...
Okay, you want to go ahead, Chantelle?
No, sure, you can go ahead.
Right, because I've heard like 2 questions, within that. The gender representation is for me one thing, and then female leadership is also, it's a 2-pronged approach. But I think there's so many. I'm just at first I was reflecting on, including something like this in this conversation, and it's easy to quote the statistics and and the figures and all of that, but sometimes I want to come with a personal, stance. And I have a friend who she works with Jamaican Women in Coffee. That's an organization that is promoting female empowerment within the coffee industry so that they can have equitable access to resources and land, to scale up their production. And I remember engaging with her, and it did say that even though 70% of women do work in that industry, 15% of them, actually own land and resources. But then what happens is that there's always this invisible connection when we talk about climate justice and human impacts. And when you drill it down further, there is a more invisible connection with gender and climate change. And funny enough, I feel strongly about this because I remember when I just started out working with a climate organization, and we had to, in the monitoring and evaluation, factor gender responsiveness and gender considerations. And it was a pain point for a lot of people. And I really don't want to shed any bad light, but the reality is that even the men were like, we don't have an issue with gender representation, in Jamaica. A lot of female managers, and which is true in the fact that the truth is that you have a lot of women who are middle managers in the Caribbean. But to say that we don't have a problem is actually exacerbating that challenge of not seeing where the problem lies. And I realized that I didn't see it at the time. So my thinking was skewed, not understanding the differences as it relates to gendered roles and how women are impacted. And as I got more immersed in the climate conversation and kind of stepped outside of that box, I realized how dangerous that was. And especially again, when you have other genders or the male gender leading that narrative that there isn't an issue and there's this exclusion. And when I realized that, just as how when we talk in the capacity, when we speak about NDCs, when you go to the big climate change meetings and you speak about common but differentiated roles and responsibilities where everybody has to have an account, developed countries and developing countries, it's just like that with climate and gender, where gendered roles apply to both male and females, or men and women. But at the same time, we have to realize that women are impacted differently. So within the vulnerable communities and within poor communities, majority of those people are women. And so it means that when they aren't given a seat at the table, when they're overlooked, when you think of a farmer, when you think of a scientist, when you think of a politician, when you think of anybody that has a role to play within climate change, a lot of times we automatically visualize not a woman. And just as how they say whatever the mind conceives, it you interact and engage with women in that way. You see them but you don't see them, so we're excluded. And it means that we're always at the back of the line, and then we're always having to work twice as hard, and to be seen, to be given an opportunity, and as Chantelle had mentioned, to be included. So I mean, I didn't even tie up that question as much as how I'd want to, but I am just hoping that I make the point that a lot of the stereotype is actually an obstacle in how the playing field is leveled. And in terms of climate leadership, I think maybe even down the line we can come back to that. But it's important because there's a difference in the responsiveness. I could speak about just in the ardor and other climate leaders that are Greta, Simone, all of us here doing impactful work, but also closer to my space. The principal director for the climate change division in Jamaica is female, and I am proud to say that because I can tell the difference in how she responds and the value people like her place on including all stakeholders, the emphasis on including young people, putting us closer in terms of policy. I personally have benefited from, her kind of sponsorship in the terms of she is making sure that underrepresented women, underrepresented people have opportunities, have access, and are part of critical climate dialogues. And I think that's just one shining example of the difference women in climate leadership can make. I had an assignment where I was working for another climate project, and I wanted to interview. It was International Women's Day that I did a feature on climate scientist. That she's one of the scientists in Jamaica that's a part of an amazing group crunching regional data, to do climate models for the Caribbean to make projections. And I wanted to do a feature on her, and she couldn't understand why I wanted to feature her because she wasn't the head of the research group. She didn't think she had a particular award or anything. And she's like, okay, why not Dr. So and so? I'm like, no, it's International Women's Day. You're a woman. I'm going to interview you. Why is that important? Because I'm saying it's important for other young girls and women to see people like you, so that uh, they understand that a scientist can look like you. So it's not about, okay, I'm in the classroom, I've never seen a female doctor, I've never seen a female whatever, I've never seen. It's very important to have those kinds of examples. So when we speak about female leadership, it's about inspiring the next generation and inspiring other people to say you can too. And stop celebrating the limited numbers, the first black female, the first female, or just we only have 2 out of 25 people in the UK, are female professors, things like that. It's not an exclusive club that we're supposed to feel proud about. So, in striving for that inclusivity, in striving for equality, we need to have the numbers are supposed to be, more than what it is now. And so that more people can champion that cause. We need more people on the front line to kind of win that war. Yeah, I'm gonna just end it there because I feel like I'm preaching.
Did you want to come in on that, Chantelle? Amazing, by the way, Dainalyn.
No, I think Dainalyn, I don't know if you saw me nodding my head because she was just hitting every nail on every head. Brilliant. I think, she just really encapsulated a lot of what I wanted to say, just wonderfully.
Yeah, I mean, Simone, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, for sure. I will definitely say Daenerys captured a lot of like the importance of like female leadership. I think as well, like our struggles as like women and young women, I don't think are separate from environmental struggles. Like both capitalism and the patriarchy are reliant on each other, and both of them seek to devalue women's work and ideas and contributions, and also our ways of organizing in these spaces. and like were further exploited by these systems, like unpaid like domestic work, such as like caring for children, the elderly, and those living with disabilities, is predominantly done by women across the globe. And it's something that isn't valued and cared for, despite it being quite intensive and like lifelong labor work. I also think like women are consistently on like the front line, burdened with like harmful health, economic and environmental effects, and like the violations of those. And whilst also carrying the weight of gender depression of being a woman or a marginalized gender in like a patriarchal society, like women really deal with a lot in their own lives, let alone organizing for a better world that we want to see. And like even looking on like an environmental side, like women are more likely to be subsistence farmers, particularly in the global south. They're more likely to be exposed to like harmful chemicals and pesticides that put them at greater risk of like cirrhosis or like liver damage or like cardiovascular issues. And it compared to like, I guess, men that are more likely to be able to move into inner cities and work other laborial jobs. So we can see how like women are again like put on the sort of front lines of harm, and like again not valued for the work that they do and like for being who they are. And I think like this is like important for like female leadership and leadership in general, because like quite often women, particularly women on the margins, like working class women, women of color, migrant women, trans women, indigenous women, are often at the crossroads of like multiple forms of oppression. So they can make the links between gender depression and like other forms of oppression within climate justice, because they experience it and like understand the systemic nature of like the current climate crisis really well. And like women are far more likely to experience like poverty. Like women comprise of like 70% of the global poor, and like this leaves women again like less resilient to disasters. There and also like infrastructure and jobs and food prices and housing, which again is required for people to live like safe and autonomous lives. And I think like the importance of female leadership here is that the fight for climate justice encompasses, and like gender justice, in fact, encompasses a fight against exploitation, dominance, and inequality. And like, yeah, both of those come together. So I think like you cannot sort of separate the two.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's incredibly put. Amazing. So then could you guys share with us any like examples of how people and women in the communities most affected by climate change are then like developing solutions and leading the way in pushing for change?
I want to jump in on this question. So in terms of the global south to extraordinary, and I mean, there are many women who, some of them we might not even know on the mainstream, but who are doing amazing work in terms of working in the advocacy of climate change within the community. But two persons that I definitely can say that they're doing the work from the global south perspective, well, our neighbors, definitely in the US, Rihanna Gunright, amazing work in terms of pushing policy in her space, pushing lawmakers to make those type of policies that will impact the communities that she's a part of, especially Black BIPOC, talk about anything environmental. I'm sure Dainalyn will agree. Her work speaks for itself. She's been a great advocate, especially for environmental protection. She's a co-chair of an organization, Jamaica Environmental Trust. She advocates successfully in the past for the protection of an environmental space called the Cockpit Country in Jamaica, which has a lot of endangered species. Putting together a petition, getting persons to sign. I was one of those persons to sign. And just from being a young girl growing up, always any type of environmental issue or environmental approaches, she's always been a very big advocate for that and being a very like a forerunner for that. So she's definitely somebody who is really pushing for that. In her latest cause about Puerto Bueno, which is another protected area in Jamaica, advocating to the government and different groups, especially using social media, to push that and to say this is something that affects all of us. We all live here. This is something that even though, the government wants to do mining and they're saying, oh, economic, and yes, we do need the money because, as a developing country, this is one of the challenges that a lot of persons have. And, as Dainalyn mentioned, a lot of homes in Jamaica are female led. And so, people need jobs and we understand that, but at the same time, it is always very important for us to recognize that at the basic, nature, we are part of nature. If we destroy nature, we're basically destroying ourselves. So any kind of decisions that we make and any kind of thinking that we do at our level, at the government level, in the communities, it must always recognize that base level that yes, we want the jobs, but in the long term, destroying the environment to just provide short-term, employment, which is important, is not the answer. There has to always be a balance. We always have to try to work to strike that balance. So yes, and there are ways that we can use the environment in a sustainable way to create jobs, but at the same time, we won't destroy it. So those are two women I can definitely say, and I'm sure Dainalyn and Dainalyn and Simone, of course. On the youth front, there's also Eleanor Terrelong, who leads the youth action in terms of climate change in Jamaica that I know doing amazing work. And I'm sure Dainalyn and Simone have many more examples, but those are some of the examples that I can say that I see these women doing the work and I see the impact. And I admire it. And these are some of the things that I want to do as well in terms of my own advocacy.
Chantelle, do you mind saying the name of the second person again? We heard the rest of it. I feel like we missed like a good 15 seconds there, which is when you said who they were.
I mentioned Eleanor Terrelong. I don't know if you heard Eleanor Terrelong, and I mentioned Diane Macaulay.
Yeah, I don't think we heard Diane Macaulay. Awesome. Dainalyn and Simone, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Dainalyn.
Oh, we might have lost Dainalyn. She'll come back.
Cool. While she's coming back, I will chat. First of all, I think my examples are past example, but I think the work that they did is something that we can continue to learn from, and like it's such an inspiration to me. And like for me, like climate justice and women in leadership brings me to like thinking about like the Federation of Ogoni Women's Association, otherwise known as FOA, who played a key role in one of the largest non-violent struggles for environmental and social justice in African history. They played a key role in organizing the protest against Royal Dutch Shell, that around 300,000 people attended. And like, they were not only incredible for doing that, but just like when I was speaking about the interconnectedness of us to like nature and society and all things that we interact with, like there's such a key example of what it means to like build a community and build like a movement based on care. Like they led education programs on family planning and used their membership joining fees to establish women cooperatives in order to train other women in a trade or skill. They also worked within the community to increase funding, capacity, like education and care among women in the community to ensure women could live safe and self-autonomous lives. And I think like we can learn so much from how FOA organized the protest, led speeches and provided food and water along the walk. They also supervised children whilst mothers went to the toilets or mothers were like stopped by the police. And like these were all such proactive avenues to sustain community, to sustain the movement and to sustain change. And I think like we're nothing without the sustained care that we have for the world, the community, you know, our sisters, women, and like within that, the belief that change is possible. And I think change is only possible when we're all working towards a goal that liberates us all. And of course, like the fabulous women on this panel as well, like Dainalyn and Chantelle are just like incredible. And I learn from them like daily. And just like other Black women in general, like they continue to inspire me to like not, to use my voice and to not feel like, not be afraid of speaking up against injustice or organizing things or making sure that people are okay. So yeah, that is me.
You know, I mean, thank you so much for bringing up a historical like advocate in that, because it's the by the scale of that you just mentioned, it's insane that I hadn't heard of them before. And that like invisible activism that women did for so long, that's just gone like under the rug historically is such a big part of it. So then, okay, let's keep going. Do you think the mainstream environmental movement is doing enough to prioritize the voices and perspectives of people of color and women? Like, how could those movements work to be more inclusive? Does anyone want to go first?
Do you want to go first, Chantelle?
Oh, sure. I was just going to say, I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to say yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I must acknowledge the work that mainstream environmental movements are doing. I mentioned inclusivity. I do recognize that a lot of these movements are becoming more inclusive. You're seeing different persons from different parts of the world, you know, being a part of the conversation. And that is important, and we have to acknowledge that. And I'm grateful to see that. Definitely the Global Youth Climate Network doing amazing work to really push that youth voice in terms of, you know, the climate change and the issues around that. In Jamaica, our Footprint JA has a lot of youth involved in that, a lot of different persons from all spheres of life who are also adding their voice. But no, in the sense that there's always more room for growth, more persons to be involved. I do acknowledge again that yes, we've reached a lot of people, but there's still a lot more that needs to be reached, and there's still a lot more that can be done to include other groups of people. I do see a lot more persons again who look like a lot more persons that can become involved, and there's a lot more that can be done. And definitely can say that, you know, in terms of one of the drawbacks from, you know, the perspective of, you know, developing countries like Jamaica, a lot of funding in terms of climate action or climate initiatives come from multinational or non-government organizations or global organizations like the UN and USAID and those sorts of institutions who may not necessarily you know, they're funding it expecting, you know, that may not be necessarily the immediate need at that particular time.
I really hope that was you finishing talking and not your internet cutting out. An incredible point though, definitely. Simone, is that something you want to come in on, or Dainalyn?
Yeah, is Dainalyn back? Happy for her to go first. I think you're on mute, Dainalyn.
Can't hear you, Dainalyn. I think you're still muted on Zoom. Why don't you go first? We'll come back to Dainalyn.
Right. I was just saying that the hosts, you're right. I was trying to unmute, but it was just saying that I needed permission to do so. I'm sorry about that. Wish I knew sign language. I don't know what's happening all morning. I've been listening to music on this laptop, and all of a sudden I have this important panel discussion, and the internet decides that it had other ideas. But I wanted to. So the question was, if we think mainstream environment movements are doing enough to prioritize. Could I hear it again just to make sure that I'm on topic?
Of course, absolutely. Do you think the mainstream environmental movement is doing enough to prioritize the voices and perspectives of people of color and women? And how could those movements become more inclusive?
So, originally, when I hear a question like this, I'm always inclined, it's not about being inclined to say no, but I'm trying to perhaps drill down a little bit into that question. And for me, it's no longer about the environment movement needing to do more to prioritize people of color,
but the overarching system and structures that exist. So, of course, in terms of an environment movement, if you have people who are dedicated to fighting climate change and they're giving platform to young people and they're giving platform to all sorts of diverse groups, then of course they need to ensure that there is inclusivity and there is variety as to the persons who have an opportunity to share what they're about and to access resources and all of that within the movement, because we can all say that, hey, we're in the same fight here. So of course there is opportunity to recognize, and I'm answering like this because I have to be aware that in terms of my cultural reality, this is where the global North experience can differ from the global South experience, because perhaps somebody like Simone as an activist, there will be more layered experiences and nuanced perspectives as it relates to how am I being included as a Black person, as a person of color within a larger environmental movement, as opposed to my reality as a Caribbean national. Then it's a more homogeneous sort of group when we think about diversity. So I want to say, of course, that there is progress, and I know perhaps down in the conversation it's not so much we all have that responsibility, and we all have to recognize the privilege that we have at some point. And I'm sorry that my internet cut out. So I think when you had asked a question about you had asked a previous question about women and how they've been responding to climate change in their own communities, something of that sort. And I also recognize that we will speak about white privilege all the time, but then the privilege is layered, because even for me, when I think about coming from a home of modest socioeconomic background, and I think that I'm privileged more than my mom to even dream in a certain way where I have aspirations and professional ambitions and all of that. But all her energies and investments have gone into providing for her children. Even my father, though it's International Women's Day, I used to always think, my father is such an intelligent but informally educated person. Why wasn't he able to go back to school to continue his education? And I thought that when I was in primary school, in high school, and it wasn't until university I understood it, because when you are from certain economic backgrounds and you're limited, then it means that you don't have the abundance of resource to fend for to better yourself educationally when you're thinking of your children. So then I realized the privilege that I even as a child to step out into that zone. And I am bringing it back because what happens then is that women know how to make do with what they have. So when you're saying how are women responding, it means that there is this I want to say natural or it's just really a very robust kind of adaptive capacity that women have. And even as it relates to adaptation strategy, it's all there in certain communities. So I just wanted to make quickly the point where I've seen women work in communities where they're heading for community-based organizations, farming groups, and with the resources that they're making, the responsiveness, you could see that where they're thinking of, it's not just about promoting economic benefits for the group and for the organization, but how does this filter into community development? So I've seen women adopt basic schools and also fund scholarship programs within communities, and also find a way to create a revolving economic scheme where you have people who are not able to purchase either land or purchase input material for farming and all of that, but we make sure that whatever the group makes, it's put back so everybody has this equal opportunity. And I know I got twisted out in all the responses that I'm giving, but I just really wanted to highlight and to make that point, where I was privileged to assist a group in Clarendon in Jamaica, where there is bushfires is prevalent. They have a lot of environmental degradation. And, the female who headed that organization recognized that we can't really look at the traditional means of communicating. So we have to use WhatsApp groups instead of Zoom and online sessions to have our workshops, to have our seminars. And already you see now that that's already, expanding the platforms where you provide access to information, right? But at the end of the day, as I said, my cabin reality will be different when we talk about the larger scheme of environmental movements and what can be done. But I already know that the step is being taken in the right direction, where people know that we have to be inclusive. I want people to be mindful of that inclusivity, that it doesn't manifest as a checkbox item, and so I'm over it, where I don't want to read about, there are things that when I think about my cousin who lives in Canada, and the first time when we were 10 years old, and she was telling me how Canada is a diverse, a multicultural country. She didn't read that anywhere because we were smart. She didn't read that anywhere. She went and she saw that it was made up of all kinds of people. And I'm making that point where I don't need environmental movements. I don't need organizations to be telling me anymore that they're about diverse. I don't need to read it on your Instagram bio. I don't need to read it on your website. I don't need to read it in your email signature. So just as how my cousin could see up and down the street that it's a multicultural, because everywhere she goes, there's not just Black people, there's like white people, there are Indian people, there are people from the mid all over. That's what I want to happen. So when people start to ask me the question, are environmental movement doing enough to prioritize people of color? I don't care about what people say in writing or even like the panel discussion. So like, no, someone can say UCL is doing more to prioritize people of color because you're looking and you're seeing the diversity on the panel right now. So that's the kind of energy and replication that I'd want to see. So I can say definitely, because it's easy to do a Google search and read stuff. But if I'm not seeing the videos, if I'm not seeing the success stories and the outputs, and if I'm not even seeing the beneficiaries talking about, I've been now given this opportunity, not even just having a panel discussion, and that's also another thing. And I have nothing towards UCL, but even the fact that that's another issue where people will see me on one panel discussion and invite me for another, and then but I am more than just somebody who has panel discussions. I'm a climate communicator professionally. I want to also have the opportunity when I submit a job application, so I feel like I'm really being included. And then, there is depth to the engagement when we talk about including people, BIPOC people in conversation. So that's also something to think about.
I think it's an incredibly made point. I love that idea of activism being a reality as opposed to like a statement. And Simone, is it something you wanted to come in on? Oh
yeah,
wait, no, sorry. Simone, go first.
No problem. Yeah, I definitely like a point that Dainalyn made about like women sort of becoming like tokens or figureheads of these movements. I think, yeah, that's like, to answer the question, first of all, yes and no. And I'm saying yes because first of all, we do see a lot more women like more publicly and more visibly like doing incredible things on climate change, on like both the like local, like national and also international scale. But on the same hand, I think like it's also not a coincidence that many of our environmental spaces have majority women, yet it's common for the leadership and like speaker roles to be held by men, like particularly cis heterosexual men with like racial or socio-economic or academic privilege as well. And I think like a lot of there is a big focus on in the climate justice movement and social justice movements for like a figurehead to a movement, and there's often a kind of dismissal of the collective action and the collective thinking and the collective work that goes into making the movement happen. And quite often, because women are not in these leadership roles and they're in the background, or they're doing the invisible work, shall I say, in inverted comma marks for anyone that can't see me, by the way, it means that the collective work and like the collective movements that women often build is completely, ignored. It's silenced. You don't hear about these stories. There's so many instances of women leading like climate justice resistance, instances of women like leading like workers' rights strikes, and you don't hear about any of it. And I think like acknowledging like power dynamics in our organizing will help us to seek better ways of organizing and building and like dismantling like systemic oppression that means that women are consistently on the sidelines of organizing or on the sidelines of like life in general. And I think like we need to be sort of centering the work of like Indigenous women, young and elderly women, lesbian and queer women and disabled women, and like uprooting the patriarchy and how it's sort of like the patriarchy sometimes is described as like it's a system that, you know, we're all participating in, we're all in it, but it very much affects our like interpersonal relationships, our community spaces, our society in general. So it's like being able to understand that like the patriarchy is something that we need to be tackling on all levels and recognizing in ourselves. So like if you're someone that, you know, in an organizing space, you're leaving the, I don't know, secretarial or like care work to women, unpicking that and being like, why have you done that? Why do you think it's only a women's place to do that and not speak on something, for example? And I also think like there are so many instances throughout climate history in which women, queer and or trans people, gender non-conforming people have been the main keepers actually of the land and have been leaders on climate resistance, organizing around care and sustaining communities and movements. But that's particularly in the global south as well. And like they hold so much knowledge around like maintaining the land and like working with the land and also making sure that that knowledge is passed on through generations. And like I think there's so much to learn from these people, from women. They teach us a lot about like what we can be doing for future possibilities of a greener, more sustainable and fair planet. So it makes more sense if the people have been doing this for so long for you to listen to these people with the most experience and the most knowledge on these things. I also think that like using feminist practice within our organizing, like consensus voting, which is like a process in which everyone is heard and you kind of come to a decision that everyone is sort of okay with or happy with, like facilitation within the group, like creating spaces that allow for our bodies and emotions and spirituality to be in the space also, because I think like in our organizing spaces there's a kind of need for like being pragmatic, for coming up with solutions and like ignoring the emotional side to like wanting the world to be better. And like again, those emotions are tied to like gender norms of like that's, you know, a woman's quote unquote thing to do. And it's like, no, like we want the world to be better. We all want to be living in a better world. And it's like it's okay to be angry about climate justice, it's okay to be upset about what's going on, and like using those emotions to channel the work that we do and make sure that the work that we go and the solutions that we pose going forward aren't recreating the same sort of gender dynamics or oppression or like just harm that it's done and we exist in like consistently. And like finally, to like end on that as well, like I think like a fight for a better world is like also campaigning on like workers' rights, against gender-based violence, against hostile environment policies. That's what it's called in the UK, but sort of like migration, immigration issues. These are all areas that women make up a higher population of the demographic affected by these. And like connecting these links, so fighting for climate justice also encompasses all of these things. And like recognizing how climate change exacerbates this will mean that we're creating the links to fight injustice on all fronts.
That's incredible. Thank you so much. I feel like I could listen to the three of you talk for like ever. However, we have, despite the fact that we've only got through about half the questions, I think it is almost 5 o'clock.
Yes, I was gonna thank you for helping me, Aarushi. I have to be the one that says the time is already over. We haven't been getting that many questions in our question page, but I'm sure that it's because we've all been so fascinated listening that we couldn't also think of questions at the same time. Maybe to round the panel discussion up a bit, if people like me also listening to all of you have been really inspired to get even more involved in environmental justice causes and climate change causes, and we want to help make change, what would be your tips for students and staff or people external to UCL who want to become more involved? Yeah, what would be your tips for those people that are looking to become more involved?
All right. And let me just, I've been speaking so long. First thing is to participate in conversations like this, because sometimes, you know, not everybody will be captivated by an Instagram caption or quote. And when you have spaces like this to kind of really have extensive dialogue and discussion, your perspective changes, and then you'll start to be more receptive to all of these things. Find opportunities. I know a lot of the tertiary institutions have incredible platforms and spaces for people to actually contribute to environmental movements and actions. So be a part of, join networks. You know, you go further together. So join networks and always look forward to opportunity to be part of climate conversations.
Sorry, that's great advice. I was just waiting whether Simone and Chantelle maybe want to come in there as well. Sorry, yes.
Thank you. I actually jotted down a few things that I wanted to say. So again, piggybacking on Dainalyn's point, get informed. There are several climate action organizations that you can follow. There is the JYCN, that's the Global Youth Climate Network. If you're not already following them on Instagram, I suggest you go ahead and follow them. There is She Climate. There is CCAFS, which is Climate Change, Agriculture, and Food Security. And there's also the UN Climate Change. I listened to Simone's podcast on Global Yardi, and she listed out a whole lot. I'm sure she has a lot more to add to that. Also, I would say support campaigns where you can, sign petitions, give to GoFundMe campaigns that move towards climate action. There was another question in our briefing that we didn't get to answer. We talked about how universities can help. I would say get involved. Forums like this, wonderful. UCL, I must commend you on that. Is the second forum that I'm being involved in that UCL has put on. So I must commend you on initiatives such as this. Also, and same on the university point, I would say volunteer. And where you can fund, persons who are involved in, climate change and advocating for it, thinking about and being very intentional about it. Not just saying, in a broad sense, but be very intentional. We're going to be supporting this initiative because, this is the community that we're in, and this is how we see that, our students or persons who work at the university, this is how we can really help them and help their situation. Simone, on the podcast, again, I wanted to just drop this in when you spoke about your work in terms of, the London and the carbon emissions and how persons from BIPOC were the most affected in this regards. How can, as a University of London, these are some of the ways that you can, in your own, sort of policies, can really impact and make those sorts of change. And I would finally, I would say assess your own individual habits, assess your own behaviors and how they affect your environment. Each of us, we're in different environments. We do things, we support things that sometimes, they're harming the planet, they're harming, and again, you harm nature, you're harming yourself. How can you change some of your behaviors to be less harmful on the environment? For example, and I'm not saying this is for everybody, I'm vegetarian. And apart from health reasons, also it is one way that you can help the planet. I support sustainable clothing initiatives. These are simple things. It seems, and I mean, it's not for everybody. And again, everybody's situation is different, but think about ways that you in your own space, in your own communities, volunteer. Their beach cleanups. Jamaica currently has a tree planting initiative. I don't know if there's something similar to that, going on in the UK, recycling initiatives, support them. And yeah, those are some of the ways that I would say, in terms of, going forward, that each of us can become involved.
Incredible, thank you. And Simone, is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, to not repeat points that have been said, the last thing I'll say is there's also climate justice encompasses so many things. There's so many ways that you can get involved, and areas such as transport, particularly around working towards accessible transport and cheaper nationalized transport, or housing, or energy, or divestment movements, or working on migrant justice work, air pollution, workers' rights, particularly around sweatshops and supporting women with that, mutual aid projects, community gardening, guerrilla gardening. There's so many. If for example, one of these aspects isn't something that you're interested in, if you are interested in air pollution, get involved with that. Those are some examples that I've given, but just know that there's usually an environmental aspect to all sort of social justice campaigns in society. So do get involved and see how you can connect those links for yourselves as well.
All right. I just wanted to add real quickly. I mean, I noticed this is the first panel discussion I've ever been see no one participate in the chat. So I'm really hoping that the conversation is, even if people are new to this, that they are able to follow. And I don't know if they agree or disagree. It would be so great to see some feedback. But especially when you're listening and you're wondering how can you get involved, I just want to remind people as well, you don't even need to have a climate background. Like, I don't have a climate science background. I'm a communication person, and and so even if you're a writer, you're a photographer, so skills like that, it doesn't have to be like, oh, I studied physics and something something. You know, just you can support the cause with whatever skill that you have. I always say the criteria to be part of a climate movement is just to care. That's just really what it is about, just to care.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great point to end on, actually. I think, Aarushi, what do you think?
I was going to say exactly that. That's such a beautiful point to end on. The
Yes.
idea of like collective care is climate justice, like racial justice is climate justice. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I recognize that we've gone over the time a little bit, so maybe we'll end with a big thank you to all of you now. Yeah, Aarushi and Simone and Dainalyn and Chantelle, thank you so much for being here today. Some people have also written to me saying that actually I'll read this out. Somebody put a very big thank you to these women, so many gems and reality checks that needed to be shared. Thank you, thank you. So I think in general it's been such an inspiring panel discussion with you today, and also thank you to everybody who attended, because ultimately that wouldn't have been possible without people attending today. I've been thinking that maybe we can pull some of these resources that you mentioned together, and I can share it afterwards also via email with those people that registered for today, along with the recording of today's panel discussion if you want to listen back to it. But yeah, I guess a big thank you to all of you who joined today, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where else the climate justice and change movement will take everyone.
Yeah, thanks. It's really wonderful to meet all of you guys.
Thank you for the opportunity to share, and thanks to everyone who joined.
Okay.
Bye.